In our politics lead, growing momentum urging President Biden to not only sanction Russian oil, but to ban it from the United States outright. Democratic Senator Joe Manchin and Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski are leading a bipartisan bill to do just that. The move could be punishing for Putin and also costly for the U.S. and economies around the world, with gas getting even more expensive. Let's discuss with our panelists. Kristen, the national average price for gas hit $3.84 a gallon. That's a hike of 11 cents in just one day, 42 cents in the last month. How long are Americans going to be willing to pay more in exchange for this moral stance and national security stance of punishing Russia?
We know that cost of living, particularly cost of gas, have been huge issues for American voters going back months now. And President Biden's ratings on how he's handling the economy have taken a hit as a result. But at the same time, polls also show Americans pretty willing to engage in strong economic sanctions against Russia in a bipartisan way. So there may be a little bit of runway here for Biden to sort of weather the storm of these higher gas prices, because now Americans have someone to blame, Vladimir Putin. They can point to overseas and that sort of chaos and blame that for what's going on at the pump rather than just looking to blame Biden and his policies.
Valencia, nearly 20 senators, Republicans and Democrats, have signed on to this legislation to ban Russian oil from the U.S. Do you think President Biden has enough support at home to put this kind of pressure on Putin that will also frustrate American voters?
I think he does have the support, as was just mentioned, this poll that Americans are somewhat understanding where this inflation is coming from at the gas pump. But it is interesting that this is all happening in the midterm year when we've been talking about inflation. We've been talking about getting people back to work. We've been talking about the economic impact that this pandemic alone is already having on Americans. And so ideologically, so many people are supportive of these sanctions to hopefully push back on what Russia is doing right now. But eventually Americans will feel it. And so this is a tightrope that the Biden administration is walking on. And I'm sure that they are grateful that they have some bipartisan support. But it'll be interesting to see what happens in the coming weeks.
Kristen, today we learned that Vice President Kamala Harris will travel to Poland and Romania, U.S. allies, next week to show support for them and support for Ukraine. What signal do you think the Biden administration is trying to send by dispatching the vice president to the region?
I think they're trying to send a message that they are engaged in this, because at the moment, to the extent that Americans are frustrated with what's happening in Ukraine and America's response to it, they tend to think we're not engaged or tough enough. Now, that doesn't mean that Americans want military action. Polls pretty consistently show they're not eager to have American boots on the ground in Ukraine. But sending the vice president sends a signal that we understand this is not just something that's happening on the other side of the Atlantic that doesn't affect us. So I'm assuming that the administration wants to be engaged and believes that this will be a way to turn the page from what's been a very challenging political last couple of months for them as well, and put the administration in a new light.
Valencia, as President Biden weighs how to respond to Putin day by day, he does have this great economic news today: 678,000 jobs added. The U.S. is nearing pre-pandemic levels on employment and jobs. Once again, of course, gas prices, inflation. Do you think that that continues just to overshadow the job gains?
Unfortunately, it does overshadow the job gains. And, it also gives rhetoric to the Republicans who want to blame President Biden for everything that is impacting his administration's gains, from the pandemic as well as what is happening between Russia and Ukraine. But I do think the Biden administration, as President Biden did earlier in the week in his State of the Union, yes, he came out very strong against what is happening in Russia and Ukraine and talking about America's position. But he also was talking about the gains. He was also talking about the fact that economically here, domestically, we are getting back to work, and that that the American people can trust the policies that his administration is putting forward to hopefully alleviate some of what they are feeling in their pocketbooks.
And Kristen, in Florida today, Republican Governor Ron DeSantis is set to sign a bill that will ban most abortions altogether after 15 weeks of pregnancy. No exceptions for rape, no exceptions for incest. it does allow exceptions for involving serious risk to the pregnant woman and fatal fetal abnormalities. Florida had been the last state in the South with less restrictive abortion laws. How much do the continued drumbeat of southern states and other states passing these restrictive abortion laws become an issue for voters in the years ahead, whether Republicans, Democrats, people who support these new laws, people who oppose them?
I think a lot is going to depend on what happens with the Supreme Court this summer. I mean, Texas has passed a law that's far more restrictive than what you just described from Florida. And yet, it did not seem, at least in any of the analysis that I've seen of Texas primary results from this week, to have been a major issue. 6 weeks is something that consistently in polls, that's much earlier than most Americans' comfort level when it comes to banning abortion. And yet in Texas, the bigger issues there seem to be things around cost of living and border security. So I expect for the midterms that to hold as well, unless the Supreme Court, when it's looking at Mississippi's law, which I believe is about the same length of time, about 15 weeks of pregnancy like Florida's, if they change the precedent set by Roe versus Wade in that ruling, then that may elevate it to be a bigger issue in the midterms, but there's still a lot going on and a long way to go.
Kristen and Valencia, my thanks to you both. Have a great weekend. Thanks for joining us today. The legal fight just ended for the Boston Marathon bomber. That's next.